I'm Meredith Honig with the University of Washington, and I'll be leading this discussion called How Principals, Supervisors Help Them Grow as Instructional Leaders. This discussion takes off from a number of important trends in the field of education. For one, there's growing recognition that the quality of classroom teaching is vitally important to student learning, and that you get to high quality teaching when school principals take on the role of ensuring that teachers have the support they need to become better teachers. Principals do this themselves, and they also broker resources to get teachers the support they need. But who helps school principals get better in that role, sometimes called instructional leadership? Recently, a great deal of attention has turned on the school district's central office, and especially the principal's supervisor, as having a key role in ensuring principals are adequately supported in their instructional leadership roles. But what is it that central offices and principal supervisors in particular do when what they do matters to helping principals get better and instructional leadership? And how might we use that knowledge to inform our expectations for how central office staff, like principal supervisors, perform in their roles? This presentation addresses those questions. I'll begin with a brief overview of the available knowledge from research about what principal supervisors do when researchers associate their work with school-level improvements, especially improvements in principals' instructional leadership practice. I'll talk about the practices and activities of principal supervisors associated with positive results. And then I'll share how we at the University of Washington are moving that research into performance standards and other tools that districts might use to help principal supervisors be successful in their roles. I'm going to get into some of the weeds of the work of principal supervisors, but really this presentation is making two main big picture points. One is that principal supervisors support principals' growth as instructional leaders when they take a teaching, not a telling approach. And this is why that word supervisors is in quotes on the slide, in that if your definition of traditional supervision is fairly consistent with a telling role or a monitoring and evaluation role, then what I'm going to share with you is very different from traditional principal supervision and much more like a teaching role, a coaching and a mentoring role. And two, principal supervisors are successful when they work as part of an aligned central office system that supports district-wide teaching and learning improvement. I'll mention this point throughout my remarks, but really want to underscore that if districts are serious about helping principals grow as instructional leaders, part of a promising strategy is to enhance the role of the people who support principals or their supervisors, but it is also to more fundamentally rethink how their central office operates in support of principals' instructional leadership. So what does the research say about the work of principal supervisors that might matter for school support? Many conversations about principal supervision start from the top down and ask, what should principal supervisors do? A problem with that approach is that answers sometimes get disconnected from the reason we're asking the question in the first place, which is we want the work of principal supervisors and others in the central office to matter to results in schools. When people first ask what principal supervisors should do, they typically survey principal supervisors about what they do that they think matters, or they ask principals what they need. Those activities that get surfaced from those kinds of data collection activities may be important, but they're not necessarily what will get to results. So we start with a question about results in schools. We ask, when students are learning at high levels, what do principal supervisors do? Research, experience, and just good sense are quite clear that any effects of principal supervisors on student learning depend on changes in teachers and principals' practice. In fact, we don't think available methods allow us to connect the work in central offices with improvements in student learning as a direct effect at any level of detail that can adequately inform how central office staff go about their work. Some very smart people are working on that question, but we're not there yet. So we start with students, and then we try to draw a line from students to the central office and principal supervisors in particular, but a line that takes what teachers are doing and what principals are doing into account, because the work of principal supervisors depends on principals and teachers. We do that by drawing on other people's research that shows that all students learn at high levels when you've got high quality teaching in every classroom. There are lots of other influences on student learning, but research is increasingly coming to consensus that the number one school-related factor to student learning is the quality of their classroom teaching and the consistency of that teaching quality. We also draw on other research featured on this slide that shows that you get to high quality teaching in every classroom or at scale when all principals are supporting teachers' development as high quality instructors, what some people call all principals operating as excellent instructional leaders. There are many different definitions of what counts as instructional leadership, but the definition that kind of wraps around all of them is that principals are operating as instructional leaders when they're actively engaged in supporting effective teaching, both directly by providing teachers with feedback, for example, in an ongoing way, and also indirectly by brokering those kinds of supports for teachers in a consistent way. The question then becomes, what do central offices do? And what do principal supervisors in particular do when they help principals grow as instructional leaders? If you go looking for research on this topic, it's actually pretty hard to find, and you're most likely to first come across studies of how central offices supposedly support different kinds of school improvement. Much of this literature, however, suffers from some serious methodological issues. For example, researchers will derive their claims about central offices based on principals' reports, which are not always good evidence of what central offices actually do. Many studies of central offices provide negative cases or instances of central offices not actually adequately supporting the improvement of instruction in schools. A third methodological flaw of many of these studies is what we call reliance on coincidence to make a connection between results and the central office. So in these studies, researchers will go into a district that's showing improvements in test scores, look at what the central office is doing, and claim there's a connection. But often these studies don't rest on any rigorous basis for making that connection. Increasingly, we researchers are doing better. And there are some studies that do use rigorous methods to connect the district with different kinds of results, like improvements in test scores or improvements in chronically low performing schools. However, it's very hard to use these studies to inform practice because researchers tend not to distinguish what staff are doing that may matter to results in schools. This is most obvious in researchers' use of the term the district to refer to what central office staff are doing when there's so many different staff in a central office that may be doing actually quite different things that matter for those results. So overall, it's really challenging to use research on central offices to learn something about principal supervisors, in part because the research doesn't allow us to see inside central offices and understand what individual staff, like principal supervisors, may be doing that matters for results. Not surprisingly, studies of principal supervisors that really highlights them as the focus of the research are significantly limited. In fact, we found 3 studies that address the role of principal supervisors. We hope that there are other studies out there, and if you're listening to this and you know of other studies, please let us know because we would love to include them in our review. But what we had to work with were, for one, our research on the role of principal supervisors in a transforming central office system, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. The work of the Council of Great City Schools has provided some great data from principal supervisors based on a survey about what they say they do and the conditions that help them do that work, which provides some great ideas for future research agendas. It does not, however, even try to connect the work of principal supervisors with improved results. And the Hubbard, Meehan, and Stein book, a terrific book called Reform is Learning, includes a chapter on the role of principal supervisors and mainly highlights the various ways that principal supervisors in the district that they studied did not have the knowledge necessary to help principals grow as instructional leaders. So that's an example of a negative case. We also did what we could to find other studies of supports that help principals grow as instructional leaders. And those studies are listed here. In a nutshell, they suggest that what principals need to grow as instructional leaders includes job-embedded professional development. So not workshops that pull them occasionally out of their school to teach them how to lead better, but on-the-job coaching and other kinds of support to help them grow. And that they also need access to learning communities of their peers or networks. And several studies have begun to highlight the importance of those networks. One of the things that's important about our work is that it really elaborates what is going on when a principal supervisor is providing job-embedded professional development. And what is the work of a principal supervisor in leading networks of principal professional learning communities? So really, these studies on this slide work together to underscore the importance of some of the practices we've highlighted in our work. When I talk about our work, I mean a research study involving 3 urban districts funded by the Wallace Foundation, supplemented by a follow-up study funded by the W.T. Grant Foundation. So our studies include 2 very rigorous comparative analyses of 9 districts of very different sizes. We've also field tested our research findings through different partnerships we have had with school systems over time, partly through our work with the Center for Educational Leadership here at the University of Washington. And we teach about a lot of the ideas that we've learned from our research. And as we teach, we continue to learn what makes sense and doesn't make sense, just on a practical level, about our research findings. In our different reports of our research, we go into some detail about the rigor of our methods, just to highlight a few points that we think make our studies particularly rigorous. For one, they were observation heavy. So we did not rely on people's reports of what they do or principals' reports of what principal supervisors do in accounting for what principal supervisors' actual work was. We were in there observing them. We have hundreds and hundreds of hours of observations of their work one-on-one with school principals and also their leading of principal professional learning communities. 2, we had strict standards for evidence. We confirmed our observed practices with theory or other kinds of research that suggests that what we saw certain principal supervisors doing matters to helping other adults improve their practice. We also were able to associate particular observed practices of principal supervisors with principals' engagement in progressively more challenging practices. So that was another important standard of evidence. And third, we did look at people's reports of what principal supervisors were doing and the extent to which it mattered, but we triangulated those reports and did not include them in our findings unless at least 3 different parties confirmed that a principal supervisor was doing particular kinds of work and that particular principals were actually improving their instructional leadership practice. We also think it's important that this research is really about and deeply informed by practice. So as we did our research, we were really embedded in people's work. And as we have been sharing our findings, we've been engaging with practitioners to get smarter about ways to present our findings in ways that are particularly relevant to practice.